Hello, and welcome back to Android Decoded. In previous episodes, we looked at the Android hardware ecosystem and how Android compares to iOS. This video will take a deeper look at software by looking at the design language and native apps. While we concluded that the user interface of Android and iOS are not that different after all, why does this idea fall to pieces a little bit the minute you actually start using these phones? Well, it comes down largely to the apps and the design language. What is a design language? Well, it's essentially a very comprehensive set of iconography, typography, color palettes, sets of visual symbols and gestures, placement of menus, and various other visual design elements that, in theory, are supposed to stay consistent no matter which app you're using, so you can always predict where an icon will be or what it'll do. It's supposed to make it easier, more predictable, and more intuitive to use a phone when you can expect the same design elements and buttons in every app. On Android, one example of where this manifests is in how the hamburger icon on the top left, or a swipe from the left edge, will always bring out the navigation drawer, and the three-dot menu button will always bring out extra settings. On iOS, a similar example is the fact that menu options will appear along the tab bar on the bottom, or how the back button will always be on the top left. Android's current design language is called Material Design, and iOS uses what it calls the Human Interface Guide. These OSs have evolved significantly. Material Design debuted with Android 5.0 Lollipop in 2014, and Apple's redesign came with iOS 7. Both of these were part of the general trend of flat design that had been building in computer user experience for years. Material Design is more vibrant, eye-catching, and favors stark contrast between bright colors, while iOS has a sort of muted, translucent, glassy look that's a bit more refined. The visual metaphor central to Material Design is that of paper or cards, stacked one on top of the other, meant to make apps feel like a tactile object you can visualize in your mind rather than just a flat computer surface. Motion and animations are a big part of this. Things are supposed to come off and on a screen that makes sense to your eyes, like how apps disappear to the bottom when you press the home button, and are stacked from the button if you go to recent apps. What sets Material Design apart from the iOS language is that Google meant for it to be the design language that could be applied not just for a mobile screen, but any screen, allowing for a unified experience across platforms and device sizes. Thus, you'll see this language being used across all of Google's mobile and desktop services and apps. For example, Gmail will look the same no matter which device you use it on. There's really no correct answer as to which design language is better. Both have mature, aesthetically pleasing designs that are highly functional and intuitive. The user interface and experience of smartphones have come a long way, especially for Android, and design languages are always evolving. All trends pass, and no doubt another trend will come by, ushering in new redesigns and a new design language for these OSs in the coming years. So a major reason these two systems will feel different is that they use different design languages. However, another major reason is that they come with different native apps and services. You would assume that the apps on your phone are made by the manufacturer of the phone, and that's true, but only for Apple. In the case of Android, since there are always going to be two companies involved, which is to say Google behind Android OS and the OEM, the manufacturer, the phone will come with a mix of Google and that OEM's apps. For example, you are likely to find Google Maps and Search bundled with any given Android device, but for this SMS, dialer, contacts, calculator, and gallery, an OEM will likely include their own apps. The number of their own apps a manufacturer will include in place of Google's is entirely up for them to decide. However, if you're buying an Android phone in the vast majority of the world, it'll definitely include at least the essential Google apps, such as the Play Store and Google Search, and that's because of the Google Mobile Services license. As I explained in my first video, Android is open source in the sense that Google releases the code behind it for anyone to use. So if you were to create phone hardware, you could in theory use the code behind Android to build software for it. But it wouldn't have the Play Store or Google Search built into it. You can download new apps, because you need the license from Google to use those apps since Google made them. So while the base version of Android is available for all to use, there's a whole suite of essential apps and services called the Google Mobile Services that aren't open source, so most manufacturers license them from Google to use on their phones. There's a bit of a give and take here. If you play nice and don't mess with the original Android code too much, or get in the way of Google's revenue stream, which is ads, you'll probably be granted that license. But it's also possible to get on Google's bad side and then you can't use all those nice apps and services. I should mention that in the very special case of China, where manufacturers don't even want Google's proprietary services, many Chinese Android phones don't come with these Google services and have replaced them with their own, even the search in the App Store. The bottom line here is though, an Android phone you buy will almost certainly come with a lot of Google's apps and services, all the essential stuff like Search, Maps, and the Play Store. If you buy one of Google's Nexus devices, however, all the apps on your phone will be Google made. But for any other OEM's phone, many of the other apps and services will be replaced by in-house versions. A Samsung device, for example, will commonly ship with most of its own apps and few Google services. Usually, the apps your device comes with will be just fine, but the beauty of Android is that you can stop using Samsung's solution for a gallery, for example, and switch to Google Photos just by installing it from the Play Store. How this works after you install an app is that, for example, if you install another web browser like Firefox from the Play Store, the next time you click on a link in any app, it'll ask you which of your browsers to open that link in and whether it should always choose that option. iOS has just recently allowed users to use their own keyboard apps, so there may be more decentralization later on. This feature allows you to customize your Android experience at a much greater level. On the other hand, the benefit of being an iPhone user is that you can download most of Google's services and apps such as Gmail and Maps and Photos from the App Store, and they're just about as good as they are on the Android in most cases. Meanwhile, a lot of great iOS services like iMessage are exclusive to Apple's devices. What this means is that you can have a comprehensive Google experience on the iPhone, but not vice versa. Although Apple did just release its first Android app in the form of Apple Music, does this mean more Apple services are coming to Android? It's a possibility, but it's highly unlikely it'll ever be a full suite of apps the way Google offers them on iOS. Well, that's all for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Next time, we'll be talking more about the app ecosystem and the app gap. As always, leave a comment below to suggest future videos in this series and subscribe and like if you learned something new. Well, see you next time.